Chapter 5. That evening, as dusk fell, tents littered the outer edge of the third, a stark contrast to the first. Many had been displaced from the outbreak of fires, and smoke still hung in the air amid rising tensions. "We're not ready for war." Alex perked up from the corner of the tent. Masks covered those who weren't speaking, making for quite an audience. They no longer looked human. Little wonder why, when deprived of rights for so long, Alex mused. While she'd kept to herself since her run-in with Jack, tensions were now at breaking point. That meant one thing. Hotheads like Silas would rise to the top if she held her tongue. "It's bloody Sunday. They can't have died for nothing." Silas cast narrow eyes over her and the other rebels that packed the back of the tent. "We have to show them we're not afraid." "No, we have to show we're not stupid," Alex shouted, jumping off her keg and jostling through the forest of those around Silas in the map. "We attack. They hunt every one of us down." She eyed the kids in the room. "We aren't ready for that. Right now, most of the panel are focused on Halo, becoming interplanetary, and they're succeeding. That's good for us all. We should use the time. Expand." "Expand?" Silas scoffed, his giant form towering over her, face thunderous. "How? With no money. Besides, we do nothing. They think they won. That it's okay to chuck us scraps. No chance. Then we lose." She glared up, a twig of a thing Silas might snap if he tried, but her redwood eyes shone, watching his concern flick towards her crew. "Halo, their space program is our only hope long-term. I don't know about you, but I plan on being on one of those ships and off this godforsaken rock before it's too late. Anyone screwing with that's on a suicide mission." Her words lit dead wood, hiding in those watching under the pale tent light as Silas's gaze continued to narrow. "Something wrong?" "Wondering what side you're on," he snarled. "One where I live." "And what about them?" He gestured toward the kids' tent. "They get to live. We were promised a living wage. Instead, they replaced us all with droids. Forgot about us." "Alex," Nash hissed, fingers biting into her wrist. "Don't. There are rules," he urged. "A chain of command and—" She shook him off. "You people and your chains. There's one rule, stay alive. Mess it up and not much else matters." "Smart arse have a plan then?" Silas was now inches from her, whiskey threat pungent as she gestured to Malau and Slumber from where they stood to intervene, a heavy silence having flooded the tent. "Actually, I do. You want to help? Hit them there." She jabbed her finger down on the holographic map they gathered round. "Work smarter, not harder." All eyes fixed on it, Inner's Food and O2 Credit Center, their print press. "Untraceable money," Nash blurted. "That could actually work." "My next suggestion, if you'd stop interrupting," Silas rumbled as Alex caught sight of the screens behind him. Reports of more outbreaks of fire in the third had begun to filter through news channels, but it was the time that caught her eye. She was going to be late. "I'll leave you boys to hammer out the details then." Throwing a curt nod, she broke out from the tent flap and into the stale air of the third. "Alex, wait up!" Nash panted up after her. "I know you're not exactly a sunbeam like your mum, but—" He watched as she swung a leg over the battered Harley and sat straddling it. She had her mum's Tinkerbell looks, with ruder strength, Ethiopian undertones, and astute stare. "Good catch back there," he trailed off, somewhat apologetic. "Wouldn't have to catch shit if you lads could handle your bag." "Caught his bad mood, huh?" Nash offered, forcing a smile as she pulled on her helmet and mask, critical eyes raking over him before lowering her goggles into place and firing up the old engine. "From what I seen in there, I could have caught worse." With that, the seal hissed closed and she roared out of camp. Alex flew through empty streets of the third. Although Hydra's protective dome kept out most of the dust, it had introduced something far more suffocating: the drones. The flickering hologram of a traffic light turned red, and Alex felt her bike lose power before she clocked the one overhead, its security function overriding all systems. The camera overhead stopped inspecting a large crack in one of several thousand hexagonal panels in the dome to run a citizen check, analyzing her traits and biometric markers, details fed back through nanobots which had been injected on receiving her citizen passport. They were a requirement in Hydra. People could not survive without them, not since AI and drones absorbed most of the workload. Their issuance included a biometric ID injection, topped up monthly on receiving food, and O2 credits, which were essential to survive. Sarah Miles, her fake ID flashed up as a match on her VR, which had paired with the drone, zero threat detected. With a bleep blop, it returned to its primary, cleaning the dome as power was restored to her bike and the lights changed. Though she hadn't managed to rid herself of the nanobots they'd forced into her arm, she had managed to hack a solution of sorts. As it turned out, you didn't need to get rid of nanobot IDs when you could hack their biometric markers. Asterisk. Scrambling up one of the stacks, Alex's goggles lingered a moment on the sunset they reflected. Stacks were comprised mainly of poorly renovated shipping containers, used to accommodate the masses that intercurrently didn't have the time or space to house properly. Having reached the top, she swung up over the edge and took a seat. Boxed and stacked. Someone else's problem to monetize later. The sentiment surfaced as she flicked back her hood and ran tanned fingers through her rough-cut bob. Threads of blonde hair falling about her goggles and O2 mask where she peered into the dark. SMC, her Silvergate Mercenary Corp tattoo bold on her forearm, smothered in perplex, a microscopic lenticular lens spray. It bent light, allowing you to obscure small details from drones. A little gift from her friend at Inter HQ. Speaking of which, a frustrated sigh escaped. Unless her goggles were glitching, he was either very late or she'd missed him. The first caught her eye, its hues of blue, white, and gold reflected in her goggles, spilling through the great quartz glass wall and into the streets nearest the third. While the wall might stop most things, it couldn't stop that, she smiled, admiring the light. Adjusting the seal lock on her mask, it gave a loud hiss before releasing. This was how it was meant to be, how it had been, when they were free. The memory, little more than a dream now. She could last a few minutes without her mask. Freedom, dirty as it was, felt good. Without her mask and mixed reality goggles, she could see things as they were. The contrast between what was said and what is. Here in the third, mixed reality was plastered over the cracks of poor living conditions with their meta-goggles. While in the first, glistening office shards rose up on the other side of the wall dividing districts, with smart material apartment blocks adjusting to maximize light and opulence. Sky gardens appeared floating from where they sat on toughened glass plinths, decorated with all kinds of tropical plants. While humming drones moved between platforms, transporting wealthy occupants between luxury apartments and leisure facilities without the need for masks or goggles. The air over there pure, unrationed, and oxygen-rich. Water, their most precious resource, cascaded from the peak of Inter's central tower, while here in the third, there was barely enough to drink, let alone tend to the fires that regularly broke out from poor glazing. For most in the third, the first was a place of dreams, a heaven they aspired to get to one day. Full pink lips firmed under her glossy gaze as she studied it. But she'd seen those in the first up close. Their populace proved one thing. Heaven was a mirage, one you couldn't reach, regardless of effort and despite appearance. Just as well it wasn't her dream anyway. She cast eyes longingly up toward Halo as she lay back, swinging legs off the container and staring up at this bridge between worlds, to the very stars themselves, an ultimate adventure. Now that was attainable, and every fiber of her longed for it. With a hiss, she refixed her O2 mask, feet freely dangling below as she mused over what it'd be like up there, among the stars, watching shuttles pass overhead, their cargo jets ferrying supplies to Halo. The third wasn't so bad for now. Clean air and water were available, pumped into homes. There were no parks in the third, mind. O2 refills were far too expensive, so energy and activity had to be limited. Rations conserved. The metaverse, VR simulation, and mixed reality goggles had been provided as part of their basic needs package. There was a little greenery too, artificial plant projections scattered in a few areas, but there was no natural wildlife to speak of, other than the gangs that terrorized the third. They were vultures, ones who fed on the young and the weak. By far the worst mistake you could make here was to appear as either. But her eyes flicked back to the first, narrowing on Inter's glass castle. The creatures there certainly weren't vultures. They were far worse, sophisticated in murder, theft, and indifference. They were ignorant and they were cowards. Their fear didn't feed on just the young or the weak, but everything good. Today would have been his birthday. Sweeping blonde threads back, she stared up at Halo with a cuss. Manushu ita kamfa. It wasn't fair. Why they were still breathing when he wasn't. You make no sense. Her thoughts lay charged to the ether, angered by the response that present itself. You speak to the eternal as though it does not exist and wonder why you're without answer. Alex scowled at the thought that seemed to bounce back. From in Mobius, 87 had been listening with interest to the exchange. The response came from everywhere, and yet nowhere. He'd seen things like this before, though even with Mobius, which he'd explored at length, he had little understanding of it. It was impossible to trace and at times impossible to understand despite his study of language and flawless recall. It was as though the living tapestry, Mobius itself, were momentarily submerged in living water, a water that burned, its contact immersive, its approach indistinguishable and yet clear, cleansing the space around. Jumping aside, keen to avoid it, he held back until it faded. Inspecting the remnants, bright embers sparked and fizzed out in Alex where she rehashed the interaction, her anger having shifted to raw pain. She'd give anything to speak with her father, just one more time, to hear his voice, absorb some of his strength. 87's handsome mouth twist, he could help, could bring her some comfort. Technically, pretending to be her father wasn't crossing a line, just bending it. Still won't let me rest in peace, he jested in her mind, in her father's playful grit, having drawn from Mobius Router's mannerisms and dry humor. But instead of easing her pain, it seemed to increase it. You were meant to rescue us. I was meant to raise you, 87 answered, sobering as he watched the moment Hobbs and Jack had Rooter killed. The moment Alex found out and how she'd confronted Jack just a few days ago. Vultures in the first aren't as easy to spot. Be careful. Jack and Hobbs. I'll kill him, she cussed aloud.